how
Yeah.
was your relationship with your mom, at that time, was it
Yeah, no, my relationship with my mother was great. My mom moved. She ended up moving to Michigan, to Saginaw, actually, and so I would
oh,
go up there and visit her for a
that's
number
the
of
second
years.
person that said Saginaw, Michigan. I ain't think I have
Yeah,
anybody else say
yeah,
Saginaw, Michigan.
Saginaw. Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
because
Yeah.
I interviewed with a person, Calvin Michaels. Shout out to him. He said
Okay.
Saginaw. I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm thinking he'd be the only one that I would
Yeah.
counter from
Yeah.
Saginaw. Okay,
Yeah.
but I stand corrected, Devin.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. So she lived in Saginaw for a while. Then she ended up
Yeah.
moving to Richmond and working in city government in Richmond and in Washington, D.C. for probably about 35 years. So,
Mm.
yeah. So she recently moved back to Ohio, where I am. And she came here in 2020. So we've been hanging out and kind of catching up and stuff like that.
Yes.
So that's been great. She just shout out to my mom. She just had a birthday
Happy birthday, Mom.
on Monday, and
Oh, this past
yeah,
Monday.
yep, this past Monday. So we celebrated and hung out for a little bit. So it was great. So yeah, so she's around and doing well. Yeah,
Oh, God bless her.
yeah,
And God,
absolutely.
God bless all of you. I mean, this is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that's why, and this is, you see why I like to get, get
yeah,
this, or the backstory, because it's just
yeah,
really, because, it's like I may resonate with some of it, but not
yeah,
all, but at least I'm able to get a feel of who made you who you are. It had,
yeah,
like I said, had to start somewhere. You
yeah,
was molded, from somewhere, and so
yeah.
now it makes sense. Now it makes sense to how you became the phenomenon that you are. So we're going
Oh,
to get
I
more into
appreciate
your
that. Thank
career
you.
as
Yeah,
well. No,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
Very, very truthful. So I want to get more into the. I love to hear about the elementary and junior high school phase of it all, because we
yeah,
don't really talk about it as much. I guess we feel like that's just part of the you know growing up. You have to go to elementary, junior high school, and
yeah.
we don't understand the level of self-discovery that comes with that. We don't understand the pivotal
Oh, yeah,
that comes with that. So yeah, so you understand where I'm coming from. You see where I'm going with
yeah.
this, right?
Oh,
So I
absolutely.
always like to get that. I like to get your personal experience from, like, like the type of social skills you develop. Was you a shy
Yeah.
kid? Were you a popular kid? You had to deal with the acne, the puberty, humping on the
Hmm.
staircase. You
That's hilarious.
maybe play with yeah,
That's
yeah.
wild.
So yeah, I love seeing that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
you have to sneak to the store sometimes to get some snacks. I mean, just
yeah,
those type of things that were you a part of any clubs, or did you own your creativity at that time? Like, I want to get
yeah,
more of it. Junior, elementary and junior high school.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was yeah. So all through high school, I was a big music guy. So like I said earlier, my dad played the drums, and so naturally I ended up playing the drums as well.
Yeah, real
Um,
quick, Devin.
and yeah,
Real quickly, I don't know if you're able to see the comments. So
I
can you
yeah.
please wave and say hello?
Hey.
Hello. Thank you. All right.
That's
So
what's
yeah, you
up.
say you play the drums.
Yeah, yeah. So I played the drums all through middle school and high school. So I was in the band. I played basketball as well. And so, it was interesting because, like I grew up on the west side of Akron, which is, a predominantly Black neighborhood, still is. But I was always I went to elementary school over there in that neighborhood. And my parents was like, nah, that's it for that. I went there
Mm,
one year, like my first grade year. Then from second grade, I was at a private school downtown Akron. And
okay.
until I got to the Copley school system in middle school. So, I was always in, a different world, so to speak. So there wasn't a moment where I grew up where I was just you know where I didn't where there were environments that felt odd to me. So when I got to high school in particular, which was a predominantly white high school, um that was what that was. And you know, like I said, I was, you know, I was a pretty popular kid. So I, you know,
Are you talking about junior, elementary, junior high? Were you popular?
I was trying to, well, actually, probably both, but you know,
Okay.
yeah, but you know, I was a pretty popular kid, and so you know, I was on, you know, student government, you know, I would, you know, I
Nice.
got on, you know, I was on a couple, you know, of those social courts, Valentine courts, and all that stuff. So, you know, there, you know, I was, you know, I was you know, I really enjoyed, you know, just kind of my friends and my classmates, you know, really in high school at that time. And I remember, you know, in high school though, you know, they didn't have a program for Black History.
Mm, I'm not
And
surprised.
yeah, and I remember my senior year, you know, a couple of us really kind of fought to get that recognition in the school. And that was there was a class that was a you know, it was kind of like a TCOM class, like a, you know, like a video class and whatnot, where you and they had, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't you know, it hadn't been around that long. And so that was, you know, I started making material, Black history material in that class
Really?
for, yeah, for the school to recognize Black History Month.
Devin, do me a favor. Can you
Yeah.
kind of, if you can remember, can you please kind of share with us
Mhm.
what, you know, what the process was and what did you piece together? I'm interested in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So yeah, which was interesting. So I think at the time I think at the time, I think we had I remember me and my buddy Jay, we had put together some clips around Martin Luther King. We had done some stuff on just kind of the civil rights movement, the bus boycott. So we were really kind of doing some research that we weren't really being taught in school, right? And you got to understand too, this was around the time where, if you think about in music, this was like the early 90s. So this was around the time when you had acts like Public Enemy, X-Clan, Ice Cube had come out with America KKK's Most Wanted, and
Yes, yes.
he had a cousin named, I think his name was Cam or something like that, and he was like part of the Nation of Islam. So there was a lot of like Black, there was a lot of, you know, stand-up Black music that was coming out, and also too, the movie Malcolm X had come out with Denzel, and so, you know, I started getting into, you know, and this was all because my high school didn't have it wasn't recognizing Black History Month.
What high
And so
school did you go to? Because
yeah, I went to Copley High School, and it was a suburb of Akron. Yeah,
okay.
graduated in '93 there, and so, you know, that was really interesting because I started learning about, you know, Black empowerment and you know, everything that surrounds that, and so it was interesting. So you know, from our year, and that was like my senior year, I think that you know, that we did that. And so for the following years, they did end up recognizing Black History Month. And so it was,
Wow,
you
so
know,
you
it
a
was, yeah,
pioneer.
it was,
You basically made Black history, Devin. You know,
yeah,
so I just
it
that's why
was
I didn't want
great.
to gloss over that. I didn't want to gloss over that. I felt
Yeah,
remiss if I did. So
yeah,
so God bless you on that because
yeah. So we really
so
did that.
that was an innovative, very
Yeah,
that's something very important. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to make sure I highlighted that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was great too, because that carried right on to right on over to college, and
Did you
college
go
was
straight to
when,
college? Because I want,
yeah, I
yeah, 'cause
went,
I want to make
yeah,
sure that we establish a
yeah,
timeline. That's why I'm trying to go in
yeah,
certain order. So you
yeah,
said,
yeah,
but I want to get more before we get into college, Devin. I want to
yeah.
get more into your high school journey because
Okay, sure.
you ain't reminiscent enough. I ain't getting enough memories. I want
Yeah,
more. I
yeah.
want. Well, matter of fact, let me go back to junior
Oh,
high school, Devin. I want to
yeah,
know. Did you hump in the staircase, Devin?
No, I wasn't humping the staircase. No,
Okay,
I wasn't doing that. It was yeah. I mean, but and that was the thing, man. You always have a couple girlfriends in junior
you
high
started
and high
dating
school
then?
and stuff like that.
You started having
Yeah,
little girlfriends. You
yeah,
have
yeah,
pizza
absolutely.
parties, back in the day, and
Yeah,
you had to be good. When you really good, you get a nice little snack. I remember back in
yeah,
the day, it was pretzel sticks for us,
yeah.
pretzel rods. Remember those
Press
pretzel
about,
rods? We
yeah,
just pulled it at,
yeah.
or we get the actual pretzel, like the big pretzel.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
we used to have like these little teen dance halls. And so
oh,
every
okay.
Friday night,
See,
and
that's what I'm
Saturday,
talking about.
we used to go to these teen dance halls and whatnot. And I think one was called Confetti's. I think that was one. And then there was another one that laser tag was big back then, right? And so the laser tag folks weren't really making enough money doing laser
Mm.
tag. So they had built this whole inside structure where you could kind of hide behind, walls and stuff like that. And so on the weekends, they turned that into a teen dance club.
Okay,
And the
okay,
place was
all
called
right.
Photons. And so we used to go up there on the weekends and we used to hang out and do our thing. And it was great, man. I mean, we used to take, girls in the back behind the walls and stuff like that, man.
Mm-hmm,
It got to
mm-hmm.
be a mess, but that was okay because we were young and we were dancing and we were, doing what young folks do. But that was a good, that was a good time. What was also interesting too was that in high school, early on in high school. So like I said, I was in the band at high school, right? So I was in the percussion section and whatnot. And I remember being on the west side. Me and my dad went over to my grandfather's one day, and we heard we were just outside and we were talking, and then we heard these drums,
Mm.
from a distance. And we were like, we heard these drums in the distance. And we went to try to find out where they were coming from. And so we found them. They were in this parking lot, and it was this kind of small to mid-sized black drum corps that were, playing these drums, and it was echoing out through the whole community. And I was like, oh my God, I have found my people. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, you found your tribe.
I had found my people. And so we went up to them and we were talking to a couple of the organizers. My dad was, and then they said, yeah, well, what can you, so then what can, what do you play? And I said, well, I play snare. And so they put a drum on me. And so they said, hey, why don't you just fall in line and see if you can kind of learn, some of
Right.
the,
Mm-hmm.
some of the sticking and this and that. I mean, that was just on a humble. And of course I didn't, I mean, they could tell that I could play, but obviously I didn't know anything, around that. But that one day ended up being 4 years of working, being a part of the youth group of Alcaf Temple 109, which was Black Shriners, which were some Black Shriners in Akron, and they had temples all across the country, and that ended up being, so I ended up joining that youth group, and man, not only did we play in parades all over the city as a drum corps and flag team, but we traveled the country. That was the first time that I went to Los Angeles when I was like
Mm-hmm.
16. It's the first time that I
Mm-hmm.
went to New Orleans. It's the first time that I went to Louisville, Kentucky. We were first time I went to St. Louis. So we really traveled the country. Competing in drum corps competitions, drum and drill team competitions, and it was absolutely fantastic. And it was one of the highlights, and I do mean the highlight. One of the highlights of my childhood,
Yes. And
because
that's why it's so important to
yeah,
keep the arts in the schools. That's
oh
the
man,
first thing they
absolutely,
cut. The first thing they want
Absolutely.
to cut is the
Yeah.
arts,
And the
you
first the
know?
first thing they want to cut is the arts, then they try
Yes.
to cut the sports. And you know, it was really important because, you know, these were, I mean, you know, this was a youth group, you know, this was a city youth group. So, you know, you had all types, you know, you had, you know, some kids that were in gangs, you had some kids that were selling drugs, you had some, you know, they kind of looked at me as kind of like a square and whatnot, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um, but you know, but we were all family. And man, I mean, you know, it was, you know, it was funny because one of my guys, Aaron, just put up a post. He had found an old picture of us in the group. And you know, it was funny because when we used to do these parades, the crowd would follow us down the street. They would hear us coming and they would get excited.
Wow,
We would
I love
start
it.
cadences and they would get
Yes.
excited and they knew Alcaf was coming down, man. And they would just follow us all the way down the street, man. I mean, we would, you know, I mean, we would, you know, mimic popular songs like Jodeci, Come and Talk to Me. And we would,
Mhm,
you know
mhm.
what I'm saying? And we would, you know, just kind of,
Love it, love
you
it.
know, it was black, it was culture, you know, it was family, you know, it was community, it was just, you know, that it was us. And so, and what ended up happening was I ended up recruiting some of my classmates that were black to Alcaf. So I was in it that first year, and then I said, hey, y'all need to come over and, you know, such
Right.
such and such
Yeah, you
such and
gotta
such.
carry the torch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they came over too, and we went through Alcaf together, and they'll tell you the same thing, man. It was, you know, it was a great, not only was it just a great childhood experience, it was a great black experience.
Wonderful.